Nirvana is one of my favorite bands of all time. I was such a huge Nirvana fan in the 90s, just like everybody else. But Nirvana never ever could have existed had it not been for a bunch of punk bands that I'm going to talk about in this video. So if you want to learn about all of the different influences that helped craft Nirvana's sound, we'll be talking a lot about Kurt since he did most of the songwriting, but I'll talk about Krist and Dave a little bit too. Um, but yeah, in this video, we are going to dive into all the punk bands that had to come before Nirvana to make Nirvana possible. Without them, Nirvana never would have existed. So let's dive right into it. And we'll get started with a real easy, boring, obvious one. In fact, the first three are all kind of boring, but they have to be mentioned because they played a big role. And the first one, of course, is the Sex Pistols. Kurt was a big fan. He loved Nevermind the Bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols in his teens, much as I did in my teens. It was that album was there's a lot that can be said about the Sex Pistols and how punk they actually are, but there's no question about it. That album was played a huge role in Kurt's in musical education, and it really opened his eyes to the rawness that music could have, the emotion and stuff like that. And that brings us to another punk band, number two, which we'll throw in there, which is The Clash. That's another band that Kurt loved, and there's quotes of him talking about how their melodic sound kind of influenced his own style, and you can definitely hear some of that Clash influence in some of Nirvana's music a little bit here and there, and the Clash. I mean, you really can't talk about any bands in any punk or punk adjacent genre that came in the 80s, 90s, or after without mentioning the Sex Pistols, without mentioning the Clash, because those bands, they were just influential on every band that came after. So all the hardcore punk bands of the 80s that I'm going to talk about soon, they were all influenced by the Clash and the Sex Pistols, of course. And a lot of them disagreed with how those bands had sold out and whatnot, but in the hardcore direction. But yeah, so Kurt, when he was a kid, he loved a lot of that. He couldn't get his hands on enough of that stuff. That 70s punk rock or proto punk, or what just some people might call some of it now. But yeah, he loved the Clash. He loved the Sex Pistols, and he really loved Iggy Pop and the Stooges. And I got a couple of quotes that I pulled up that I'm going to mention in this video. And here's one from a Rolling Stone interview. Kurt said, Iggy Pop was my main musical hero growing up. I loved his stage presence. I couldn't imagine being that free. Kurt actually he wanted Iggy Pop to produce In Utero. That's a fun fact. He approached Iggy Pop, or I don't know if he wrote him a letter, a call, or how it went down, but I know that they were in contact with each other, and Kurt did want Iggy Pop to produce In Utero at first, before obviously it didn't play out that way, but those two. Iggy and Kurt had a mutual respect for each other, but Kurt was a huge fan of their rawness, and you can see it. I mean, his stage performance of him diving headfirst into the drum set and stuff like that. Just that stuff is just. I mean, it's so obviously inspired by Iggy Pop and his and the Stooges and the stuff that they would do on stage, and the energy and the rawness and the emotion. And those three bands right there from the 70s, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, and then Iggy Pop and the Stooges, really helped to shape Kurt's young mind, as well as Dave and Chris were fans of those bands too. But those 70s punk bands really helped to set the stage for all the other bands and all the other influences that would come after. And this is where it starts to get interesting for me, because I love 80s hardcore punk. To me, that's real punk rock. And not that there hasn't been punk before or after, but that was, like, to me, in my opinion, which is worth nothing, but my personal opinion, 80s punk was just great. Hardcore punk was awesome. And one of my personal favorite bands from that era, also one of Kurt's favorites, was Black Flag. Black Flag is a band. They formed in the 70s, had a bunch of different singers, a bunch of members, and from Southern California. And Kurt, they were all about the DIY, do-it-yourself, punk rock ethos. ethos, the at work ethic. They toured the country. They started their own label, SST. Greg Ginn, the guitarist and founding member of Black Flag, started that label. Booked all their own tours, did all their own promotion, all their own everything they did themselves. And Kurt loved that, the punk rock spirit of it, and being on tour, just kind of being on the road, just in the. If you ever read Henry Rollins' book, Get in the Van, he talks about his experience with Black Flag, being on the road and stuff like that. And Kurt, I think the first time Kurt saw Black Flag was it was when Henry Rollins was the frontman for him. So, and he loved the energy of it. But Kurt, I don't know if I didn't write down any quotes, but I did write down one. Kurt described Black Flag as having a quote weird heavy sludge sound, which I can get where he's coming from on some of their music. Stylistically, like the guitar solos, Kurt's guitar solos are so similar to Greg Ginn's style. It's not even funny. The influence is just obvious. There's no question about it in my mind. You can just hear Greg Ginn's soloing in Kurt's soloing. Just the chaos of it, is the energy, the just it's just the influence is undeniable. But yeah, Kurt loved Black Flags, just everything about him, just like I do, and it helped him to form the direction he wanted to go in, with Nirvana, both sonically and like, I don't know how to say politically, but like, but both like image wise, not that Kurt or punk rock in general gives a shit about image so much, but it is a factor. I mean, it is something to be thought about. Um, but yeah, he loved the authenticity and the rawness and the realness of Black Flag, and that was one of the main influences that Kurt cites. And there's I know he's got a bunch of quotes talking about him and stuff like that. But if you like. The book "Come as You Are" by Nirvana, the book "Come as You Are" by Michael Azerrad. It's the story of Nirvana. If you're a reader, I highly recommend it. It came out decades ago, but it's just packed with all kinds. I wish I still had a copy of it. I think I got rid of mine years ago. But if you want to really dive into Kurt's influences and stuff like that, check out that book because it's just packed with all kinds of good stuff. But moving right along, another band that Nirvana couldn't have existed had they not existed first was the Wipers. And Kurt had actually said that the Wipers, he referred to them as his favorite punk band, and said that their first two albums were, quote, life changing. Now, if you're a hardcore Nirvana fan like me and you dove into all their outtakes and B-sides and stuff like that, you might know that they actually recorded not one but two Wipers songs covers. One of them is called D7, and the other one was Return of the Rat. And I love that song. I still listen to both versions sometimes of that song in the gym, the Nirvana and the old Wipers version. But anyway, he loved the Wipers. Was really heavily influenced by them. And like I said, he referred to them as his favorite punk band on at least a couple of occasions. So that's another one. Now this next band is one that I never personally got too into. I only know one or two of their songs off the top of my head. But Kurt loved this band, which was Flipper, and he loved them so much that he actually made a T-shirt, like his own homemade DIY Flipper T-shirt that he wore in. I think he wore it in the "Come as You Are" music video. And he might have worn it on like a couple of. He definitely worn it on at some appearances and on some shows because there are pictures of him wearing a lot of pictures of him wearing that shirt. But he loved Flipper and he loved their weird kind of chaotic-y sound. The song, what's this? I can't even remember the song that's in my head. It just has tons of echo and delay and reverb. It's real wishy-washy kind of sound. Um, but but uh, but yeah, I didn't write down any quotes or anything, but Kurt, like they're lousy, they're lousy, they're loud, noisy sound. He liked their aggression and all that other stuff. But he was really big into them. I can't tell you too much about them because I never got too into them myself. But that was another big favorite of Kurt's and had a big influence on Nirvana and all of their music. Now this next one, I do know. I know everything about because they're one of I know I love them as much as Black Flag, and it's Minor Threat. And but it wasn't just Kurt who loved Minor Threat. You know, because Novoselic loved him too, and Dave Grohl. Not only did he love Minor Threat, but he grew up in the DC area where Minor Threat was from, where Henry Rollins grew up too, before he moved out to California to be with Black Flag when he asked him to join. So Dave Grohl grew up in the DC area playing drums. His first band was called, I think they were called Scream, if I remember correctly. And they were on Discord Records, which is Ian Mackay's label. Ian Mackay was the singer from Minor Threat, and later um, Fugazi and Egg Hunt and Embrace, a bunch of other projects, a lot of really good projects. But Minor Threat is like the hardcore punk band from the 80s. They just the energy, they I mean, God, they played through their whole set of like 30 songs in like 30 minutes. It's just fast, in your face, awesome hardcore punk. And Minor Threat again, they were another really big into the DIY. Ian started Discord Records in DC, and Henry Rollins' first band was on that label. SO SOA State of Alert, I think. But tons of great bands have been on Discord Records. But anyway, so Dave Grohl, before he moved out to Seattle, the Seattle area to join Nirvana, he grew up in the DC area playing in bands, and he knew Ian. In his first band, like I said, I think they were called Scream. They were on Discord Records, and so Dave already was influenced by the fast drumming and all that the other stuff going on in DC and stuff like that. And he brought that energy with him to Seattle to when he joined Nirvana, and it all just kind of came together. But Minor Threat is another one of those bands from the 80s that like pretty much every punk band that came after was influenced by them in some way, shape, or form, because they were just, I mean, it's Minor Threat. They were just they were amazing. They were just this little flash in the pan, flash in the just brief moment in time where they just did it, and it was just, oh, it's just they were so good. I love, I can't say enough good things about Minor Threat. I love them, and so did Kurt, and their music is heavily influenced by them. And now I'm going to mention a few kind of punk-ish, punk adjacent bands that I don't know if I'd call them like straight up punk or hardcore punk, but they definitely have punk influence, and they definitely had influence on Nirvana. Now, the first one I'll mention is the Melvins. If my buddy just saw them a couple of weeks ago in Providence, Rhode Island, said they were awesome. I wish I could have gone, but I couldn't make it. But anyway, the Melvins are like I don't know how to do it. They're like the real sludgy, kind of heavy-ish kind of sound. I mean, all the bands, everyone in Nirvana was hugely influenced by the Melvins. They all loved them. And I got a quote from here's a quote from Dave talking about Kurt and his love of the Melvins. He said, "Quote: Kurt played Melvins records over and over. The band was a huge part of the DNA of Nirvana." So there you go. That's coming from Dave Grohl. And then I wrote down a quote from Krist Novoselic too. He said, "Quote: The Melvins changed everything. They were slower, heavier, and we were just blown away." So you can see that the Melvins had impacted both of them. But also Kurt wrote in one of his journals, he wrote, quote, "Melvins, the best band ever. They're loud, they're evil, they make you want to smash something. That's music I love." So I don't have to say anything more about the Melvins. You just heard it from straight from the mouths of all three members of Nirvana. They huge influence. They were friends with them. Kurt actually tried out for the Melvins and didn't make it in, didn't make the cut. But probably a good thing for us Nirvana fans. But yeah, the Melvins were a big influence. One more I'll talk about. Well, a couple more I'll talk about, but one more I'll mention is the Vaselines. This band is like a lo-fi, punkish, vibe-ish kind of band that has a real poppy sound that Nirvana. A lot of their popish sound was directly taken from the Vaselines, and they did a bunch of covers by the Vaselines, like Molly's Lips, Son of a Gun, Jesus Don't Want Me for a Sunbeam. They I guess they was that by the Vaselines? I can't remember that last. That was, I think. Well, I know those first two were definitely by the Vaseline. Molly Lips and Son of a Gun were definitely by the Vaselines. But Kurt was really influenced by their poppy sound. He liked their lo-fi but poppy sound, and you can hear that incorporated into a lot of Nirvana's music. And you could kind of put the Pixies in there too a little bit. Like I remember Kurt talking about how "Smells Like Teen Spirit." He felt it was just a total ripoff of a Pixies song, and he's not wrong. It kind of is, but at the same time, it's not. But yeah, those bands had a big influence. Now there's a bunch of honorable mentions of the Pixies. I already said. Husker Du. That's another band that I couldn't find any direct quotes, but I could have sworn I've heard Kurt and Dave talk about how much they liked Husker Du. But that's one that had influenced the Germs. Darby Crash. Kurt was a big fan of Darby Crash, and the Germs. There's influence there. Um, and then the last band I'll mention briefly is the Meat Puppets, which are not punk exactly, but like punkish, punk adjacent, and they were hugely influential on Nirvana. And Nirvana did a bunch of covers of theirs during their acoustic unplugged performance, which was phenomenal if you've never seen it. And they really just did a bunch of that whole performance was just amazing. But uh, but anyway, so now you know a handful of bands that came before Nirvana that Nirvana would not have been Nirvana had it not been for these other bands. I mean, all these bands were hugely influential on Nirvana, some more than others, but they all played their role. You can hear Greg Ginn's guitar solos and Kurt solos. You can hear, in Molly's Lips, and you can hear the poppiness of songs like that coming through in other like Polly and some other songs. You can hear the Iggy Pop, you can the raw emotion and aggression. You can see that on stage when Kurt's playing. You can if it's all there for everyone to see. But it's always interesting to me. Like whenever I find a band or an artist or whatever that I like, I always like going back and finding out what their influences were. How did what created this person? What created this art? What came before it that had to create it? And if you always just uncover a vast sea of amazing music going back decades and decades that influenced the bands that we love and that will influence our own music and music of the future. Another band that now this has been mostly I wanted to talk about punk bands in this. I will just mention one more band that was really big that Kurt was a huge fan of was the Beatles. I mean, how can you not like the Beatles? I certainly wouldn't call them punk, but I love them. Who doesn't? You can't be a rock fan and not like the Beatles, can you? I don't know. You probably can. You can be whatever you want to be, um, but from their influences spanned decades and decades. Lots of all three of them, Chris, Kurt, and Dave, were all music lovers. They loved more than just loud, fast, electric rock. They liked a lot of music and could appreciate it. And yeah, so now you know a little bit about some of the bands that made Nirvana possible. I mean, without Nirvana would not have existed had the Sex Pistols and the Clash not existed, had Black Flag and Minor Threat not existed. These it all weaves together the tapestry of music history. Everything influences everything else, and it's really fascinating to dive into. Maybe I'll dive even deeper at some point. I'll really dive into a lot of these bands like Minor Threat, Black Flag. I could talk for hours about these bands because I love them so much. But but yeah, now you know about some of the influences that Nirvana has taken from the punk rock world. I know that there are tons that I didn't mention. So who do you feel like I left out that I should have mentioned? Tell me in the comments. And till next time, be well.